Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. All right, first question. Hey Jason, I remember when you made a video about not recommending weighted push-ups or push-ups, but what about a variation where you place your hands on a Smith machine bar, put your feet up on a bench, and press away, an alternative to the dip? This seems beneficial because 1, moving the body through space, 2, no wrist issues because you're gripping the barbell. I mean, I suppose if you wanted some bizarre alternative movement, I could see that being maybe a valuable assistance exercise. But my question becomes why? Why? Like, why go through the trouble to set all that up when you could just walk over to a pair of dipping bars and do weighted dips? And that's kind of my point with exercises like that. I just don't see what it brings to the table versus what we already have available. Now, granted, I understand people want to get some exercise variation, and so something like a weighted push-up is some assistance movement. I mean, I could see it, but in this case, you have to have a Smith machine, and in my opinion, Smith machines should not be available at all. I think they're dangerous and they need to be removed from gyms. So if my other advice was taken, this wouldn't even be physically possible, because every gym that doesn't want to hurt its clients would have the Smith machines already removed, so you wouldn't even have it available. And I just don't see why you would need this alternative to the dip. All right, we have enough bench variations. We could bench press, we have weighted dips, you have different angles you can do at the dip. And I'm not saying this is a bad exercise by any means. I mean, I suppose it could be an alternative to the dip, but it just seems like more trouble to set up the weight. And it doesn't bring anything to the table that the dip can't already do just as well, if not better. So if you see my point there, I'm not saying it's a bad exercise, but why? Why? What is it that you're going to get out of it that the dip can't already do, or a bench press can't already do? And that's rather my point with some of it. It just doesn't bring anything new to the table, and it's just more work, more equipment required, and more hassle to set up for no actual benefit. All right, next question. How much more muscle and strength would a beginner gain in 6 months from doing your 2.0 program versus starting strength? Does starting strength 3x5 have too little volume? Does it have enough for maximum muscle growth? And then he asked a question about the juggernaut method. I don't know enough about that to even discuss it at all, so I can't answer that latter. So let's stick with your first set of questions. I feel like starting strength needs a little more volume. All right, starting strength needs a little more volume for most people's basic needs. You have to look at what starting strength was written for. It was written for everybody. Right? In other words, Ripito, when he gives starting strength, expects everyone from a high school football player up to your 55-year-old grandmother who just joined the gym to run starting strength. Okay? So you need perspective there. It's a method that will work for everybody, widely different demographics of people who are novice lifters, and he wrote it based around those criteria. My Novice 2.0 program is a little more specific to men who are seeking maximum hypertrophy and maximum strength in their first 6 to 12 months in the gym, right? Who maybe have somewhat limited recovery. It works for a wider diversity of people than my original novice program, which I think pre-selects people who are genetically gifted already just due to the sheer amount of workload. So the 2.0 is a little more scaled down version of it, but it has more total upper body work. All right, it has more total upper body work because of, again, the additional exercises and doing the bench and the press every single workout. I think that matters. I think there's just not enough total pressing volume and work in the original starting strength for comparison. So that's one of the big differences. And so, yeah, you're obviously going to have slightly more potential for total muscle growth on this program. Right, and that was the idea. That's what I'm doing with it. We're trying to maximize size, and I feel starting strength does a good job of building your lower body. I feel a little bit of the upper body just isn't quite sufficient. And again, things like your chest and shoulders and everything simply need a little more work than they're giving them. And that's my opinion on it. And I think my program is going to be better for that. Now you're asking how much more? You can't quantify that. How could you even quantify something like that? We would literally need to take 500 people of pretty equal demographics to each other so that we get a good selection and run them through both programs and then check the difference to even answer that. There's no way we could even quantify that, how much. People need to stop asking stuff like that because you'll never get an answer. It's like asking how long is a piece of string. All right, next question. Hi, Coach. What The what, when, where, how of accessory lifts or alternative lifts. You say stalled on barbell back squat. How do you choose an accessory, and do you train that accessory like a main lift, or you just introduce it for some variety and continue to do the main lifts? You're squatting 3 times a week and stop progressing, so you sub in box squats. Do you only sub the box squat in the first third of the workout and continue to back squat, or do you replace the back squat entirely? Thanks, coach. A box squat is not an accessory lift, it's an assistance lift, right? An accessory movement is purely for hypertrophy. They'll share a similar bar path. In other words, it trains a motor pattern with it. In the case of something like a box squat, most of the time you're going to sub it in for certain workouts, and you're going to base it based around your needs. In other words, you can usually do a little more volume with the box squat than the back squat. So you might sub it in with slightly more total sets, or you might rotate it in for a phase. You might rotate it in on specific days. But that's when we're getting into assistance exercises, or they might be done as back off work to get more training volume in. Usually accessory lifts, right? Accessory lifts like the JM press or any tricep work for your bench press. That's an example. You would add that in, right? You bench and then you do your accessory work. Your accessory work is there to build up the weakest muscles, to hypertrophy the weakest muscles in a lift. So on your back squat, let's assume that you feel like your spinal erector is the weak link. So you add in hyperextensions, or you add in good mornings. You add them in as additional work. That's usually how accessory movements go. And you continue to train your other lift normally, but you add in the accessory work to put extra workload and put extra meat on in your weak links, right? And you need to base that upon your movement pattern and looking where you feel the weakest, where it looks weakest as far as the muscles involved when your form starts to break down or degrade when it gets heavy. That's what you look at. You have to assess that. Now, novice lifters don't need this stuff. Novice lifters also don't know enough about their own training to assess these things anyways. So this is really more the area for intermediate and advanced lifters. And so keep that in mind when we're discussing these things. All right, next question. Hey, Jason, isn't the conventional squat superior to the box squat because it uses a longer range of motion? There was some back and forth there, but I'm just going to state no. You set the range of motion on the box squat to wherever you want it, right? Standard box squat is usually 1 inch below parallel, just like a normal back squat, right? Some people do extremely deep boxes. There are people who set their boxes to be 5 inches below parallel, which is pretty much like an ass to grass squat or a full squat, right? So this really varies. It's not like that at all. It's a bizarre question because the height of the box that you set up determines your range of motion, right? It determines the range of motion. What you need to remember is that the box squat versus the normal back squat has a slightly different bar path, and it breaks up the eccentric concentric chain, right? That's what's going on different. Now, to argue that one is superior to the other, no, they're just tools in the toolbox. They both have their place. They both have their uses. I would obviously generally push most novice lifters to build their base off of a normal back squat though, right? Even though I'm using box squats a lot these days, I do both. And I would recommend novices just do the back squat, right? They're going to be better off for it. They're going to get more mileage out of it in their first year of training. That's just my opinion. All right, next question. Hey Jason, my overhead press has stalled recently, but I found that adding more volume for my side delts in the form of a lateral raises fixed the problem, and the overhead press is progressing fine again. Unfortunately, I'm now getting pain in my upper traps, which feels like the start of an overuse injury. I already do deadlifts, overhead press, rows, and then with the side laterals, I think the traps are getting overworked. Is there any exercise for the side delts? It doesn't involve the upper traps much. Thanks for all the great videos. No, all exercises that work your delts, particularly your side delts to any extent, work your traps also. Cannot be avoided. Just one reason why I laugh of guys putting a lot of focus on their traps. Put more focus on your shoulder work in general and your traps will grow, right? Like a lot of people notice lately for me in a lot of my shirtless videos, even though you're at a lower angle, that my traps are pretty big. I don't do any trap work. I do nothing for my traps except all my shoulder work and pulling and everything else. So no, you can't get around that, brother. That's normal. So if you add side delt work in of any type, expect your traps to get additional stimulation. Now, if you feel like you're getting close to an overuse injury, it might be time to either take some lifts out for a bit or it's time to deload, right? Don't be afraid to deload. I deload. I do half-week deloads pretty regularly, right? When you're pushing a lot of volume and a lot of weight and you're training hard, particularly as we start to get older, don't be afraid to deload. They're fine. They're not going to hurt you. Deload every time you feel like you need. I've learned to check my ego at the door when it comes to them, right? I've learned the hard way a few times. One of the pieces of wisdom I have learned now that I'm an advanced lifter in my 40s, do not be afraid of deloads. You're better off doing them. When in doubt, take a half-week deload, right? Don't be afraid of them. And it sounds like you're at that point. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.